You're working just the way you always have, maybe even better. You're more experienced, handling tasks with ease. Then it starts. Your opinion's no longer relevant. You're always overqualified. Suddenly, you're unemployable. This isn't part of aging, it's ageism. Everyone deserves to age without limits. Let's make it a reality. Ageism. Notice it, challenge it, change it. Search Age Without Limits.
This week on Retirement Rebel Life After 60, I'm talking to Dr Carole Easton, OBE. She's the Chief Executive of the Centre for Ageing Better, and we talk about their 3-year campaign to combat ageism and her previous career in the voluntary sector and mental health, and how her rebellious spirit, which I love, has helped her push forward ideas and campaigns to help people in the past, something that she says has given her great satisfaction. But first, if you're new to this podcast, please do check out other episodes. They're all available on all the podcast platforms and also on my website, retirementrebel.co.uk. Welcome to Retirement Rebel Life After 60. I'm your host, Siobhan Daniels. Join me on a journey to meet inspiring rebels who've redefined retirement. Together, we'll explore new passions, triumphs over challenges, and discover the vibrant possibilities of life after 60. This is about living boldly, not just aging. So, are you ready to rebel? Last week, I had a great chat on the podcast with Siobhan Davis, who's planning to row anti-clockwise around mainland UK and become the oldest woman to do that. Her crew will be made up of women in their 50s, her in her mid-60s, plus one woman in her mid-30s. And she wants to show that women build more resilience as they get older. She says women should not self-limit. They should just give things a go to stretch themselves as they age. If you didn't catch the episode, then please check it out. It's available on all podcast platforms. Thank you so much for joining me, Carole. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Great pleasure to be here, Siobhan.
First of all, for some of our listeners, can you explain what the Centre for Ageing Better is?
Yes, the Centre for Ageing Better is a charity working towards ensuring that we all have the opportunity to age better. We know there's a lot of people who are fortunate. They age well, they can keep fit and healthy and live exciting and long lives. But very sadly, we don't all have that opportunity. And there's far too many people suffering in ill health, not able to work, being discriminated against because of their age. And that's not good for them. And it's not good for individuals. It's not good for society as a whole, actually, because we all lose out if a big proportion of our population isn't having their best lives.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that and campaigns that you're involved in. But I just want to take you back a little bit and sort of find out more about you and what makes you tick. I mean, where did you grow up and how did you start your working career?
I grew up in London. I've had the privilege of growing in London all my life. I love it. So that has been, for me, extremely positive. I started out as a mental health practitioner working in the NHS. I have this maybe neurotic need to feel useful and do something that benefits people. So I started out in that arena, which I enjoyed tremendously. And it's wonderful to see that there is a greater focus on mental health nowadays.
What made you want to go into mental health as opposed to general nursing?
I wasn't nursing, I was doing family and child psychotherapy. So I was a mental health practitioner, I wasn't a medical practitioner. I think just gradually over the years of doing temporary roles, being exposed to the difference that it can make if people are getting the support and the help that they need, can transform lives, as can physical health. I suppose we have our own individual preferences, and I enjoyed talking with people and listening to people. And I think the combination too of working with children and adults, I really enjoyed when I was doing that work. I have been incredibly fortunate in that through my life, I've been able to combine work with doing something that is useful and potentially can make a difference. But I know that's a privilege because I've earned enough to be able to live by doing that. But also that it's selfish, doing things for people is also very rewarding to oneself, isn't it? It's always a two-way, I believe.
Well, no, definitely. I mean, one of the reasons I started this podcast was because I wanted to help and support particularly older women, women over 60. I wanted them to have their voices out there. And I definitely feel that my battery gets filled when I get all the messages from people saying maybe how this podcast and my book, Retirement Rebel, have helped them to rethink and reevaluate how they're going to age and how they see retirement. So I know what you mean. It feeds back to you as well. So, yeah, there is a bit of selfishness in it, I suppose.
Definitely. And that's okay, isn't it? That's really okay. And that's true for volunteering as well. It's not just for the people you're going to help. It gives you a role and so whether it's paid work or volunteering, I think that's absolutely true.
So you did mental health. What other areas of the voluntary sector had you been working in?
Well, what I found slightly frustrating working in the NHS, but I have huge respect for anyone who does it, is that it's harder to talk about changing the system. So you're working so hard day by day helping individuals, which is absolutely crucial. But you don't have a voice necessarily in changing system, changing policy, changing the world. So I took a job. My first job in the voluntary sector actually was working at Childline. And what I discovered there was that you could listen to individuals, you could give children a voice, you could really engage with them in a way that was so important. But also as a charity, gathering those voices, having a say, being listened to by politicians, by influencers, you had the opportunity to change things as well. And I love that combination of doing something and changing something. So theoretically, you don't need to do it so much in the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one of the things that you're centering on now, isn't it? The Centre for Ageing Better. You're wanting to help to get change made to make it better for people who are aging, the young and the old. And that's how we connected, really, because I'm very much on the same page as the Centre for Ageing Better, that it's a problem that needs addressing and we need to talk about it more. When did you first start working with the Centre for Ageing Better?
It's about a bit more than 3.5 years now. I will be completely honest. I wasn't looking for this job. It was an interim role originally. I'd done more of my work with children and young people than with older people. But once I got my foot in the door, and maybe a bit like you kind of go, oh my goodness, some of the issues are different.
You see the extent of the problem, don't you?
Exactly right. And it's also something that we need to shine a light on, because at the Centre for Ageing Better, the range of work we do on enabling people to age better is vast. We're not helping people necessarily directly. We're trying to change systems. We're trying to change practice. We're trying to change attitude. We're trying to change the view of politicians so they make things better. We're trying to change the views of individuals and employers. But we're all prone to ageism. So it means it hasn't been focused on, because somehow all people over a certain age have been sidelined and their concerns and their issues haven't been an issue of general concern. And that's why it's so exciting.
Have you yourself faced ageism as you've got older? You're in your 70s now. Because what I find alarming is half of the people that were interviewed for your research said that as a result of aging, they'd been spoken negatively to in their lives.
Did it surprise you?
It surprised me, the number, that it was as large as that. I knew that was happening because I personally have felt that in my life. I felt that I've had ageism, even simple things when people are trying to flatter you. You look good for your age. Well, what they're trying to say is you look good, not for your age. But I mean, some of the other statistics that you've got from your research, from the Centre for Ageing Better, things like 95% feel that they've been treated negatively in their lives because of their age. That's incredible.
Yeah, I would challenge anyone of any age to say they're not ageist, because I don't think any of us are immune from it, right? So if we're all ageist, we're all going to be at risk of experiencing ageism, even from our own selves, frankly.
But there's a lot of people out there who will be shouting at this podcast going, I'm not ageist.
I would challenge them on that 100%, because where have they been living in a bubble somewhere? Even children are ageist. The research shows that children as young as 5 and 6. And when I say ageist, I mean they have really stereotypical views of what an older person looks like. So what ageism is negative treatment, but it's also making these huge assumptions about a population of over 20 million people and saying they're all the same. And that's how we bring up our children. If you're old, you must be infirm. If you're old, you must be not able to string a sentence together. Definitely not able to work. All these things that children grow up with. So I would challenge anyone I meet to say, you may not actually act on all of that. You may not treat people obviously negatively. You might unwittingly do some of those things, but have you never said to yourself even, I'm too old to do that? Or have you looked at someone and thought, oh, they're dressed a bit kind of weirdly for someone of their age?
So what are the problems then? We acknowledge, if we say most of us are ageist, what are the problems that fall from that?
Some people might dismiss as quite trivial, but I think they reflect those huge stereotypes that we have about older people. And where it gets really serious is where, because you're over a certain age, you can't get a job. I mean, that really is serious, because that means society's losing out from your skills knowledge. Employers have got huge gaps in there and, they can't fill their vacancies at the moment. And also for individuals, they're at risk of being poor, they're at risk of being isolated, they can't contribute to society. So we've got huge economic problems. If we got more older people back into work, that would benefit all of us. It's really serious. It's really serious if older people don't get treatment for physical and mental health issues that they're contending with. And again, that's terrible for an individual, but it's bad for society as well, because then we have more demand on the health service, or we have more demand on the social care services. So ageism is the kind of form of discrimination that people are most likely to kind of go, doesn't matter really, it's fairly trivial, so what? But when you stop and think about the implications for everybody, and everyone's going to get older, it's not just about older people now. If you're 40, do you want to think by the time you get to 60, you won't be able to get a job when the pension age is going to be nearly 70 by then?
But this is the problem in the workforce. We're saying get people to go back into work when they're older, but often it's a toxic environment. And the younger people daren't call it out. They see it happening because they think they've got their career progression. And the older people don't acknowledge that it's happening to them. They suffer in silence because they're frightened to death of losing their job, because they don't feel they can get another job. So nobody's speaking about it. And that's what I love about your campaign, is that you're putting it out there on notice boards, on the tube, everywhere else, asking, are we ageist? And I think that's great. Why is the Centre for Ageing Better running this campaign?
So this is the second year of our Age Without Limits campaign, to start that conversation, to start people noticing that ageism exists. So this year our theme is, it's not aging, it's ageism. So things like, my knee hurts. Okay, is that aging? Or not getting it fixed is ageism, because it means you're kind of just assuming that that's going to be the case. So the campaign that we're running, Age Without Limits, is to start that conversation, start people noticing it, because it isn't inevitable. It's absolutely pervasive, as I say. We're all subject to it. We're all probably slightly guilty of it, but we can change it. And that's why this year we're saying you've got to notice it, challenge it, and change it. And what that means is notice when ageism happens. Let's open our eyes a little bit. Let's notice that if someone says, oh, Siobhan, 65, was caught up in the street. But why was your age relevant to that particular story? I don't know. I mean, it is to the work you're doing, of course.
No, I hear what you're saying. Often they bung the age in there, and we don't need it.
Exactly. What relevance is it? Exactly. What are the implications? And actually, it often has an implication if you stop and think about it. Notice if someone's saying, well, oh my goodness, I couldn't really expect you to understand this piece of technology. I mean, how rude is that apart from anything else? But people make those assumptions that you're too old to understand technology. Well, some young people don't understand technology. It's these huge generalizations that we're making.
But I think our generation as well, because we've grown up with these negative stereotypes of what it is to be old and to look old, a lot of women who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s and beyond self-limit, don't they? Because they kind of think to themselves, oh, I'll be ridiculed if I wear that item of clothing, or I can't do that because I'm too old, or I can't possibly look like that because of my age. And again, that's what I'm trying to do, going around the country doing crazy things and putting it out there on my social media to say, look, I'll be 66 next, but I'm doing it. I want you to do it. I want you to find that energy and to do it, and not worry what people think. But it's hard to do that, isn't it?
It is hard when it's been your whole life. I don't want to blame people for not doing it, because the responses can be very negative. And I say a lot of it is self-limiting too. So it's about having a conversation with yourself, isn't it? About saying, why am I stopping myself from doing that? You internalize, and it intersects with other things. I think women are particularly prone to those kind of appearance concerns as they get older. People from other minority groups, they've got to cope with, say, racial discrimination and age discrimination. If you've applied for 50 jobs and been turned down each time, like some people I speak to, I'm a bit embarrassed. I used to encourage people to fudge their age on application forms.
Oh, no.
I've stopped doing that, but you know what I mean?
Yep, and I understand why you will have done that. And I think I probably would have been an advocate of that before I started being a really strong pro-age campaigner. But now I kind of think, how dare you, just expect me to judge me by my age? Because I say age isn't a number, it's a vibration. And the people in their 40s can be less vibrant than I am in my mid-60s, than you are in your 70s, and other people in their 80s. So we shouldn't be defined, we shouldn't be pushed into a box.
Oh, I agree. And also the irony is that actually these workforces with a intergenerational workforce with older people, younger people, are more productive, more innovative. So it's actually better for the business, let alone for the individual. Even that doesn't seem to be quite enough to persuade people. Oh, the other one too. I remember so vividly a woman saying to me she was turned down for a job very explicitly on the grounds of age. I mean, apart from the fact that's illegal, she said because they said she wouldn't stay very long. She was, I think, 59, 60 at the time. And I said to her, what was the average tenure of people? This was a social care role. And she said 2 years. So the young people will turn over in roles more quickly than older people. So again, that sort of fiction that somehow you employ someone a bit older. Well, actually, they might be more committed to that role for a longer period of time. And that's hugely damaging when people have that wisdom, those knowledge, that experience to bring to a workplace. We're running something at the Centre for Ageing Better called the Age-Friendly Employer Pledge, because we're all individuals. We all bring our experience of ageism with us. And so I think we can all help each other too to stop and think and change practice. And the Age-Friendly Employer Pledge is a way that employers can stop and look and, like we have done with other protected characteristics.
But do you think pledges like that really work, or it's just a box ticking exercise for companies? Because I know places where I've worked, when they were trying to address ageism and sexism, it all ended up being more a box ticking exercise than actually listening properly and changing their policies and really embracing what they needed to do to address the problem.
I don't think this one's a box-ticking exercise, because there's very little benefit to that for the employer. I think some employers are doing a great job already. They haven't signed the pledge, they just get on with it. And there's others who've said, actually, we do want to start thinking about this. There's no other motivation for them joining up to this pledge at the moment. So it means, too, that it gives the employees an opportunity to have a conversation and raise the issue, because it comes from both ways, that we're all employees, and a lot of people, an employer is an employee as well very often, so the managers. So I think it really allows conversations in companies about culture, about discrimination, about opportunity, about training. That's the other thing in the workplace, is arbitrary decisions at cut-off ages. There's no point training someone anymore over a certain age. So I think something like the pledge opens up those conversations and does empower people to challenge when they might not have felt able to do so before.
And it is important, isn't it, that they do have the conversations in the workplace and that women feel that they can speak up if something is feeling ageist to them. Because I definitely didn't feel that I could speak up, and I felt that marginalised and voiceless. And I think there is that fear that you're not going to be able to get another job, so that you hang on in there and allow this kind of ageist behaviour to permeate the culture. So it is good that it's being addressed. What do you hope at the Centre for Ageing Better to actually achieve by your campaign? I mean, it's over 3 years, so you obviously realise it's going to take a long time for the message to get through. But what do you want to achieve?
Your culture and attitude change does take time. I mean, you mentioned the issue of women in the workplace or how we respond to people with disabilities. So these things do take time. It's not that we don't have a magic bullet that kind of we can all wake up tomorrow and it's gone away. So the campaign is the first of its sort in this country to say, let's start talking and having the conversation about ageism, about the harms that it does, and about how we can change things into the future. So we would be thrilled if we are measuring. We've got some really robust measures in place which give us the kind of baseline for how people are experiencing ageism. What we want to see is that shifted even a bit in 3 years' time, but then that shows that there's the potential for it to shift more. The more people that have had the conversation, the more people that have stopped to think about ageism, the more people start challenging, as you say, not in an aggressive or confrontational way necessarily, but saying, have you stopped to think about why you've made that conclusion about someone of a certain age, or why you've raised that as a question? I think really can begin to shift how people in work, in social settings, in retail, in all sorts of areas where we see ageism played out, will reduce. And then the more serious implications of ageism, which are things like, people in poverty, people dying too young, people suffering in ill health, then we can begin to really, hopefully shift the dial on some of those issues.
I'm just going to interrupt for a moment to shamelessly plug my book, Retirement Rebel. It's published by Vertebrate Publishers, and it's my honest account of feeling broken in my 50s and finding my happy place in my mid-60s. I got rid of my home and possessions and hit the road in my motorhome for a roller coaster ride along life's adventures. I want it to help younger women not to fear ageing and older women to grab life and run with it. You can purchase a copy in most bookstores and on Amazon. Right, now back to the conversation. I think fundamentally ageism starts when you're in school, when you're very young. Like you were saying, the children's idea of what it is to be old. And I think one of the ways that it can be changed is also going into schools and trying to change the narratives, the images, the dialogue, the perceptions of what it is to be old. Is that something that you incorporate in your campaign?
Our audience are less schools than organisations like the workplace. I do agree, however, that ageist stereotypes begin very early and that you could, impact on those at school. I'm always slightly worried of suggesting these poor teachers who have so much to contend with already, we give them yet something else to worry about.
Yeah.
But having said that, they are individuals as well. They will be exposed, hopefully, to the campaign, and they can change their own language and how they talk about older people. There's quite a lot already in schools, isn't there, about which is challenging gender stereotypes. I saw in my grandson's school, it's like the firefighter can be a woman, and that would never have been the case when I was a child, that the firefighter, well, sure, absolutely not. I want
blue rolls and pink rolls, weren't they?
So yes, I think it can be done. And also, I'm a supporter of, intergenerational activity, and we do tend to divide our society into defined groups.
Well, I'm organising some dinner parties at the moment where I'm inviting younger people and older people, and I'm getting the younger people to ask 3 questions for the older people, and the older people have got 3 questions to ask the younger people, and they put them in a jar, and throughout the evening, they've got to discuss the issues, and I'm calling them Get the Conversation Going, and it is so that the younger people can understand the reality of what it's like in the workplace when you're older, and the older people can sort of let the younger people know what they can do to change the policies. Because years ago, for example, when you were pregnant and women would go and tell their bosses they were pregnant, they would lose their
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah.
And then legislation was brought in that said, you can't do that. Then the menopause, they started questioning their ability to do the job when they were struggling with the menopause. Now there's policies and training on that. And the next big thing is ageism and sexism in the workplace. And that's why your campaign, the impact that that's having on that just fills my heart. I think it's great. But I'm trying to get to the young people and the old people together with the dinner parties. It's only a small thing to do, but I think it's all about this getting the conversation going, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's also about then enabling that valuing, because one of the things I think we're dealing with in an ageist society is that older people are not valued. Older people can devalue children and younger people as well. But so it can go both ways. And I'm not saying younger people aren't discriminated against in the way you've just described. I've done work with young women too, like you say, because in the workplace, it's like, oh, you're going to have a baby any minute, we'll not employ you, or you're having a baby, so we won't employ you, whatever it is. So none of us probably immune to that. It's easier to discriminate if we don't know or don't have contact or we can't make it real. I think you're completely right. Yeah?
But talking about what has, in effect, been the elephant in the room, ageism, is really good because they can't hide it anymore. They have to address it. They have to adhere to your initiative, employers and companies, to be able to bring policies in place to make it better. I mean, what's been the response so far to the campaign that you're running at the Centre for Ageing Better?
So it's been very positive. We were doing work on ageism before we started the campaign. So things like the editor's code for published material and journalism, where we've had good conversations about saying that age somehow doesn't feature and it should in the same way. And that's been taken up.
Well, you've been sort of addressing journalists and sort of advising them how they should structure the articles that they're publishing.
Exactly. And that
that's good.
That actually you have to think about how you describe other groups, protected characteristics, and that age is also one of those characteristics. So that's been positive.
So that's had an impact already, has it?
Yeah. We've also got things like our age-friendly image library, which, again, is challenging. You know, there used to be a time when all images of old people were wrinkly hands, right, or walking stick.
I was guilty of that as a journalist for over 30 years. That's why I cringe when you're saying it, because I can remember justifying it because we used to say, you know, the backs of hands or the backs of heads, so we didn't identify the person in case they'd passed away. We had rationale for doing it, but it's just not acceptable. And I cringe how much I used to cut the pictures that went with the news stories, and I would choose, feet with lovely fluffy slippers and things like that. And I think, oh no.
Well, but you're owning it now, aren't you? You're saying that
yes, very much so.
Even you were not immune to these. This is the way, and that's why this is a slow but important burn that we start challenging these ideas. So the image library that is free access at the moment for Centre for Ageing.
Oh, it's fabulous. I've been into it a lot, and I encourage people to use it because it's free, isn't it?
It's free, and these are people who've all given permission, and so you don't need to use these terrible stereotypical images anymore.
They're very vibrant images as well, which is what I like. It just shows people living their ordinary lives, how we are living. And if people want to use it, how do they access it? Go
onto the Ageing Better website and then follow through to the image library. Yeah.
And anybody can use them, can't they?
Yeah. Absolutely. We encourage people to do so. And it's lovely. We see these lovely images around the place. So, yeah, we were doing work on trying to challenge ageism really through a lot of the work we do, either directly or indirectly at the Centre for Ageing Better. The difference last year was that we are doing the public-facing campaign. So we decided that we need to engage a wider audience in this conversation, in raising awareness that targeting practitioners, charging politicians isn't the way you change something as fundamental in our culture as ageism. So that's why we committed to doing this campaign, Age Without Limits, because I'm not going to pretend I'm 70. I have got new challenges that I didn't have when I was younger, but ageism doesn't need to be one of them. there's enough to contend with without that negative or stereotypical treatment that you get at any age, not when you're older either.
But I also think a lot of it people don't realise, friends of my daughter, when I've instigated the conversation about ageism, they don't realise they're being ageist. They'll say to somebody, oh my goodness, your mum looks good for her age, or, or your mum's, she's incredible, she's really young at heart. And I go, excuse me, I'm old at heart because old is good. I don't need to bung young in there to justify being a vibrant person. I'm old at heart, and I'm trying to get people to recognise that old can be a positive and old is good. And that's, what I love about this campaign. So what are you asking people to do with this campaign?
So the campaign, as I say, it's the call to action is notice it, notice ageism. That means kind of pay attention both to what you, like you've just said, how you describe older people, how you might talk about them, how you might notice something that's happening out there. I had a experience recently where someone shouted at someone for being in the way and said, just get out of my way, you old man, as if the old man, but the old man took huge offence at being called an old man. So they were both being ageist in a funny way. One, that the first guy used it as a way of going...
as a derogatory term.
But then the person himself didn't do what you did and said, no, actually, I'm fine to be old. He kind of went, how dare you call me an old man? So it's kind of both ways, really. And I think, and I'm not suggesting someone challenges that. I think that might have been a bit scary to challenge on that. So you need to take...
Yeah.
But I do think there's good ways of challenging it. And that's why we're asking people to notice it and challenge it. So whether that's just like you say, like, what did you mean when you said I was old for my age? Because then people go, oh, actually, what did I mean? And they haven't really, they've just kind of swallowed it whole, haven't they? They haven't really stopped to think about what they mean by that. I had an employer who told me I was the second choice for a job. And when the first person dropped out, I got the job. And then she was very honest. She said to me, Carole, I said, I wouldn't have given you the job originally because I didn't think you'd be entrepreneurial enough or something like that.
Oh, my goodness.
And then we were doing interviewing together. And she and one or two other people started doing the same thing. And I quite politely said to them, why are you discriminating on the grounds of age? And they went, oh, yes, we are. So it's that noticing it and then challenging it in a way that doesn't need to cause a row. Because actually a lot of people I speak to, I don't know whether you do, when you sit down and you go, have you never said to yourself even, I shouldn't do that at my age? They go, oh, yes. And then you go, okay, so you're making those assumptions about yourself. What are you making about other people? So I think there's ways of doing it. And then that will lead to change. The more we can notice and challenge, then we will have a reduction in ageism and we'll have a reduction in those broad stereotypes. And as I say, hopefully that will feed into workplace, health services, gym, retail, all sorts of places.
Because it's the health service as well. That I think that is a scary area where ageism is definitely prevalent, whether or not you get called for treatment or whether you actually get the treatment, preconceived ideas of how fit you'll be post-operation or something like that, depending on your age. And I'll be 66 next. My knee's very stiff. I know I'm heading for a knee replacement at some stage. And I put it off as long as I can. But there is a little voice in my head that thinks, don't put it off too late because eventually you won't get the same level of treatment.
Yeah. I have quite a lot of questions. I mean, again, we know our NHS is under a huge amount of pressure and that there's, medical reasons for some of the decisions. But I do question, I've stopped being called for routine screening. And I kind of go on breast cancer recently. And I was thinking, it's funny because I thought I'd read that I was more at risk as I got older at having breast cancer. Why am I being stopped for screening? So I think there are questions in the NHS. We know older people less likely to get mental health therapy rather than drugs. So there's assumption, even though the evidence doesn't necessarily support that that's the best way to go. So unfortunately, I fear you're right. And I would like, again, without being confrontational, to have those conversations and at least flash out what the thinking is, what the values are. Because I was talking to someone quite senior in the NHS not that long ago, and he said, you have to remember that someone of 85 coming through my door may be as fit and healthy as someone else of 55.
Yes,
it isn't
definitely.
age. And very sadly, some communities, and it intersects with other forms of deprivation. The healthy life expectancy gap is huge in this country. It can be as much as 20 years. So someone from the most deprived part of the country may be suffering in a way with long-term health conditions as much as someone 20 years older in another part of the country. So again, it just demonstrates that age is a very poor way of making even decisions about health treatment, because it's not going to address that differential. And that's why ageism is so important.
I've read an incredible book called Elderhood, and it's by an American gerontologist. It's brilliant because she advocates for elderhood being a whole category in itself, that we have childhood, and we have adulthood, and we've got paediatric hospitals, we've got hospitals, and elderhood is the next phase of our life. And we're in elderhood far longer than we're in childhood, and yet they have all these specialists and special facilities. And medication is tested predominantly on men and middle-aged men, that are given to older people. And so she's now really focusing and campaigning to get the same treatment and benefits for people in what she addresses as elderhood. And it makes sense to me, very much so.
I mean, gerontology is a bit of a Cinderella area in medicine, isn't it? It's interesting.
Which is why she went into it, because as a medical student, she was made to feel that. And she was actually, I think somebody was almost dismissed for some form of treatment because of their age. And so that shocked her and appalled her, which is why she then went into researching and looking into it more. But it's called Elderhood, and it is a really good book to read.
Yes.
And I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So the next stage of the campaign for the Centre for Ageing Better that you're involved in, what can people do if they want to be involved in it?
They can go, obviously, the simplest things, go on the website for Age Without Limits. Just Google Age Without Limits, go into that. We've got, if you use Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, Instagram, all those platforms will give you more information about what ageism is. There's a nice quiz on there that you can do as well, give suggestions about how to challenge without putting yourself at any risk, and lots of other information about ageism and about the harm it does, and gives you kind of evidence too, so that in those conversations, you're kind of going from an informed point of view. If you're in work, then you might want to encourage your employer to sign up to the Age-Friendly Employer Pledge. Again, we're not charging for that. It's quite a low-level ask. Employers need to nominate someone in their organisation who will be the age-friendly champion, and just do one thing that will make a difference for the culture or their recruitment or their advertising that will make a difference. So there's something for everyone on that, whether it's just have a conversation, use some of the material, have a conversation, use some of the images.
That's the thing, the material that you've got available and all the research statistics that you've got. I mean, looking through those myself, I was just could not believe the figures and the percentages of people. A third of them self-limit because of age, 2/3 spoken to negatively since they were 50, and that gets even worse, post 60.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of figures that if companies get their hands on and get the images, they can have sort of good sessions with their employees to highlight it, couldn't they?
Yeah. I mean, even just holding a session and talking about it, it makes a difference, doesn't it? Because, we used to do a lot of those things around gender or around other protected characteristics, but the age one is sort of, all the jokes about it sort of make it all right. And when you then ask people just to stop and think and go, is it really all right? Because this is the impact it's having.
In this podcast series, I've done an interview. It's going to run in a few weeks with a lady who's a comedian, and she focuses on jokes, around being older and how they're accepted and how they're received by older women. And it's quite interesting, that conversation. So people will have to tune into that to find out. So it's been lovely talking to you about the campaign, but I am the retirement rebel, and I am getting together my tribe of rebellious women. So one question that I ask all my guests is, when was the last time that you personally actually felt rebellious? And can you remember when you did something really rebellious in your life?
You know, when you use the word rebellious, it really, I kind of want to go out and stamp my feet in something. I think
there's all levels of rebellious, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. There are. And in a way, the campaign is rebellious. I think actually what it reminds me is even one of my very first chief exec jobs was at Cruise Bereavement Care, which you wouldn't think is a very rebellious organisation. They said to me, why do I want the job? And I said, I want to challenge the status quo. And they kind of looked at me and said, oh my God, what's this woman doing? You know, and I was a young woman at the time. And I said, I want to change the way we talk about death and dying, not unrelated to our conversation today. So I think I've taken jobs. This job is a rebellious job. I'm running the support. I've had to fight a bit, to be completely honest with you, to get the campaign going, to get it funding. You know, these things are not easy. You have to keep on keeping on, don't you? Like, you know. And so I do see this campaign as rebellious because it is, last year we said, are you ageist? Some people were a bit uncomfortable that we would do that. But it was designed to make people stop and think. And now it's not aging, it's aging. It's like, oh, what are you talking about? So I think in my jobs, I have been able to use that rebellious nature, as I say, and say, I'm not going to just accept things as they are. We need to do something to change them.
And I think for the kind of campaigns that you're involved in, you always need to almost have that little rebellious streak in you, don't you, to be able to push things forward and to get people to listen and to also have the awkward conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to put up with not everyone's going to love you all the time because, you know, you're challenging how they think and it takes time for people to come around to that sometimes.
But I do think the older I get, the more I don't really care whether people like me or not. I used to want people who I knew I didn't even like. I wanted them to be my friends. And nowadays, I think if you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. Just move on.
Yeah. I think for me too, the challenge with something like ageism is that it will impact on all of us as we get older. Ageism impacts at any age, but even, you know, we're talking about ageism around older age. But also not to lose sight of the really serious impact it has on a proportion of our population. And then that doesn't get addressed. So that population who are isolated at home, poor, decisions being made that impact on older people and somehow then become marginalised. And for me, I am prepared to be rebellious when it comes down to that, most definitely.
Oh, I've absolutely loved hearing about your rebellious streak. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Lovely to have chatted to you.
You too, Siobhan. Good to see you.
Well, that was a great chat. I was blown away to hear about just how many people feel that ageism has impacted them in their lives. Over 90% of those spoken to said that they'd had some kind of ageist impact on their life. It is good to hear, though, that the 3-year campaign by the Centre for Ageing Better, which is just in its 2nd year, is being received so positively by people, as well as the fact that companies are signing up to their anti-ageism pledge. One thing that I did learn is that more of us do need to call out ageism when we see it. We need to talk about it. We need to talk about it as a problem if we're ever going to get to the root of the problem. And if we're ever going to really wipe out ageism, especially in the workplace. We all have a right to get older without the fear of being treated negatively, just because of the number of years that we've been on this planet. Next week, my guest on the podcast is Nicola Marshall, who runs the Meet and Grief Cafe. She helps people to navigate grief. As we get older, we often think about our own mortality, but we don't let our family and friends know our dying wishes. Nicola wants us to talk more openly about grief so that we can actually support one another. Death's going to happen to us all, but she feels, as a society, we still don't prepare ourselves or our loved ones enough, and she wants to do more and to help us talk more openly about grief. I hope you enjoy listening to our chat. Thank you so much for joining me on today's Retirement Rebel Life After 60. I'm truly grateful for your time and your willingness to embark on this journey with me. If today's conversation sparked something within you, or if you've your own rebel story to share, I'd love to hear from you. Please reach out through our social media channels or email, and let's keep the conversation going. Email us on podcast@retirementrebel.co.uk. And remember, if you found value in our time together today, consider sharing this episode with a friend who might also enjoy and benefit from our Retirement Rebel community. Spreading the word helps us grow and continue to challenge the narrative around life after 60. All of our details can be found on retirementrebel.co.uk. Retirement Rebel Life After 60 is written and hosted by me, Siobhan Daniels, and produced by the incredibly talented Matt Cheney. Join me again next week for another episode. Until then, keep embracing your inner rebel and living life to the fullest. Bye for now.